What's up, world? Uko here from Better Therapy Now. Netflix's You, What Joe Goldberg Gets Wrong and Right. Today, I'm diving into Netflix's most binge-worthy psychological thriller, You. You stars Penn Badgley as Joe Goldberg, an intellectual bookstore owner who stalks women. He looks like a romantic lead in a rom-com, but he's more like Dexter than Hugh Grant. It's a basic stalker thriller plot, but it gives us a lot to talk about in terms of mental health because of its purposeful emphasis on childhood trauma and mental illness and how that impacts what we tell ourselves about the world and our relationships with other people. So number one, who is Joe Goldberg, really? He's charming, introspective, and very intelligent. But all of that is really a weapon because he's manipulative, obsessive, and ultimately dangerous. But Joe doesn't see himself that way. He believes that he is the hero of his own story. And that's the first red flag. Joe Goldberg suffers from pretty severe cognitive distortions, which is where someone reinterprets their reality to fit a false narrative, often shaped by trauma and unmet emotional needs, which is where someone reinterprets their reality to fit a false narrative. And it's often because of childhood trauma and unmet emotional needs. Throughout the entire 5 seasons, there's a voiceover of Joe's voice narrating all of his thoughts. Sometimes he thinks one thing but says the complete opposite in the name to manipulate other people. While he's pursuing his love interest, the voice in his head is reconstructing his reality by saying things like, I'm doing this just to protect her, or she just needs somebody to see the real her. This constant justification in Joe's head shows how trauma and obsession can lead to severe delusional thinking. The next thing that You really highlights is childhood trauma and its impact. Throughout the story, we get constant flashbacks to Joe's childhood, and it's really marked by 3 things: violence, abandonment, and neglect. The flashbacks relate to 2 primary relationships. The first one is to a bookstore owner that turned out to be very abusive to Joe. It wasn't his father, but it was a father figure, and the first person that gave him his first lesson in being a psychopath. The second relationship is with his mother, which is really marked by abandonment and neglect and emotional abuse, mostly because Joe had to witness and experience her relationship with several abusive men. These experiences highlight how Joe relates to people as an adult, and it begins to explain the why behind his obsessive behavior. The flashbacks are concerned primarily with Joe's childhood relationships, which highlights another psychological concept, attachment theory. Attachment theory explains how we make attachments with other people through relationships as an adult by analyzing our childhood attachments, specifically with our first caregivers. There are several different types of attachment styles, but Joe is clearly anxiously attached. He desperately craves connection and obsesses over it, but he sabotages it through controlling behavior. His trauma explains his behavior, but it doesn't excuse it, which is an important distinction. The third thing that You highlights is obsession versus love. This is where the title, I think, is important, You. He often goes through these monologues where he's talking about a different you. Once he begins to obsess over a female, they become the only thing in the world. I think that's why it's titled You, because everything that he does is in the name of that person. The show also romanticizes Joe. The show teases you to empathize with Joe. You can look online and see that plenty of people love Joe. The brooding looks, the voiceover, the bookstore job. All these things make him very attractive and blur that line between obsession and love. And it's the same thing that happens to his victims that begin to ignore red flags. There's a few things you can take away from You in terms of mental health. One is boundaries matter. If someone constantly crosses them in the name of love, run. 2, healing from trauma takes work. Joe tries everything under the sun to change himself. He moves to new cities, he changes his name, he gets new partners, but he repeats this cycle of murder and never seeks professional help. And 3, mental illness is not an excuse for harming others. Accountability is key. So what do you think about You? Let me know in the comments below. I'm Uko from Better Therapy Now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.